Right, well, hello everyone, and welcome to this network heating and cooling webinar. The title of today's webinar is The Impact of REMA and Urban Overheating from Heat Pumps. I'm Dr. Andy Smallbone. I'm an associate professor at Durham, and I am the Network Plus director. And so this event is organised through the EPSRC Network Plus for the decarbonisation of heating and cooling, and part of a series looking at the different challenges of decarbonising our heating and cooling sector and behaviour. This month, we are delighted to welcome speakers from Edinburgh and Cardiff universities who have both led projects which have been funded by the Network Plus and researching into the impact of electricity market reform on the electrification of heat and the increased risk of urban overheating caused by heat pumps. We're grateful to both presenters for providing their time today. So basically, we will follow the same format as normal. The two presentations will be about 20 minutes each. The session is currently being recorded and will be uploaded to the Net Zero Research website and the Durham Energy Institute YouTube channel as soon as possible. I should say thanks again for your support and the interest in this area. Please get in touch if you have any feedback or any fantastic suggestions for seminars, speakers, subjects, and please, if you're not on the mailing list, please do ask and try and get them on the list so you can find out what's happening each month. So first we will hear from Dr. Andrew Lyden from the University of Edinburgh. He will present the findings from the impact of REMA on the electrification of heat project. Dr. Andrew Lyden is a lecturer in energy system economics at the University of Edinburgh, and his research focuses on advancing open source energy system science, and he's interested in net zero electricity markets, multi-energy systems, district heating and cooling, and long-term energy storage.
Thank you very much. So the project I'm going to talk about today is the impact of REMA on the electrification of heat. So REMA is the kind of review of electricity market arrangements, which is a kind of big consultation that's ongoing at the moment from the government, who are looking at how we can change market arrangements for electricity in order to make them more suitable for the transition to net zero. And it is really the impact of this on how we're going to electrify heat, which is going to be the main way that we're going to decarbonise heat in the UK. So it's a lot of electrification of heat really means the kind of rollout of heat pumps that's coming forward. I wanted to start today just kind of giving the current context really of where we are with heat pump rollout. So on the left here is a graph that looks at the heat pump installations, and it shows in purple the Climate Change Committee's pathway for heat pump installations, and then in kind of orangey yellow is the government target in 2028 for 600,000 heat pumps per year installation. And this black line shows the kind of historical installations of heat pumps. In 2022, we were on about 72,000 new heat pumps were installed, whereas the Climate Change Committee target was 130,000. So we're about half of the installation that the Climate Change Committee would hope for to meet the net zero target. So we're sort of significantly off track in terms of heat pump installations. An important kind of facet of how expensive it is to run heat pumps is to do with the ratio between electricity prices and gas prices for consumers. So the graph on the right here shows how this has changed over the years. The Climate Change Committee kind of have their kind of target of about 3.4 ratio, while the government is a little bit lower than that for 2030. But this black line shows the historical changes in this ratio. So for kind of early 2010s, it was below this 3.4 number. But then kind of in the past few years, it did increase quite a lot due to the kind of energy pricing crisis that's happened in the past few years. But then there was a move from the government to transfer policy levies away from energy bills onto kind of general taxation, and this led to kind of quite a dramatic drop in 2022 in relation to this ratio. So the ratio is back on track, but you can see that it could easily go off track again if government policy changes again. So this is kind of like where we're at in terms of heat pump installations and kind of electricity prices to gas, and how we can assess the rollout of heat pumps in terms of those things. I just wanted to also introduce the team as well. So this was a project which had many different partners, and it was quite a nice experience because it was partners that hadn't worked together before as well. So it gave me an opportunity to hire a postdoc who did a lot of energy system modelling, And we had 3 co-Is from different universities. So Stephen Watson at Loughborough University has done lots of interesting things around heat pump demand estimation. Rinaldi at Cranfield brought lots of expertise in kind of modelling thermal systems, optimisation, understanding of that engineering policy border. And Peter Connor as well at Exeter University brought lots of expertise in national and local policy related to energy. It was good to have this team together to try and start to tackle the kind of overarching problems that were or challenges that we identified in this project, which as I said, it was all about the impact of REMA on electrification of heat. And so the aim was to investigate the impact of these reforms on electrification heat, and that's really the kind of rollout of heat pumps. So we wanted to look at REMA and see what reforms in there might have the highest impact on the electrification of heat. Another objective was to look at different scenarios of electrification heat, which have already been kind of developed. We wanted to enhance the modelling capabilities that we have in terms of this power system, open source power system model we have already. We wanted to be able to model these identified reforms in order then so that we could assess, kind of come up with a quantification of the impact of the different electricity market reforms on the rollout of heat, and think a bit about energy policy as well. So REMA is kind of the ongoing consultation from the government, and it set out lots of different options in terms of what might happen or what we could change to the electricity market, what we could move towards, and so the current status is that we've had a feedback to the consultation. A few kind of these ones in red have been removed as options. There still remains a lot of options on the table, so it's still unclear what the way forward is in terms of electricity market arrangements. And there's also a fierce debate ongoing kind of from different stakeholders. And I went along to this session at All Energy this year, which had representatives from energy suppliers, generators, lots of different stakeholders, and there was kind of fierce debate around locational pricing and the benefits and disbenefits of locational pricing. So we see that there's lots of debate about what the best way forward is, but there is consensus around that the market does need to reform. The electricity system is changing. We're having more and more renewables in the system. I want to build a market that really represents the reality of that changing electricity system. So we reviewed REMA in terms of this impact on heat pump rollouts. We looked at kind of the main categories of reform that's in REMA around wholesale markets. So wholesale markets are going to become increasingly variable. This graph on the right here shows the changing distribution of wholesale prices in the future. So in 2025, this blue line, you can see that it's fairly static throughout the year. There's a few periods where the price goes down to zero or even a little bit negative. But on the whole, the price is mainly dictated by gas power generation, so it stays fairly static. But in the future, like this orange line and the green line, 2035, 2050, we're going to see much longer periods of £0 wholesale price, which is reflected because of the zero marginal cost of renewables. So when we have a system that's lots of excess or reliant on renewables, we have a £0 marginal cost or wholesale price. But then what we do see is there will be some periods as well we have very high prices. So rather than relying on gas to do the kind of intermittency or to deal with the intermittency of renewables, we have expensive technologies like carbon capture storage or hydrogen power plants, which will have to be expensive to turn on, but to be used in those periods of low renewables. So that kind of variability in prices is very interesting. There's talk around locational markets, as I said, so I'll talk a bit more about that as that's the one that we kind of chose as the one to really try and quantify and model. There's talk about splitting by technology as well, so where you might have a firm wholesale market where we're just like dispatchable generation sources, and you might have a separate renewable market where you have lots of these kind of zero price electricity. There's talk about how we can increase the rollout of carbon power and flexibility. We might see more use of CFDs, enhanced CFDs as well. They might have some flexibility element to it. They might have a locational element to it. So we'll see how that changes out in the future. There's probably going to be a role for flexibility and capacity adequacy for heat pumps as well. So heat pumps and thermal storage can provide flexibility and what markets might emerge for this. There might also be revenue in the capacity market as well for kind of heating technologies where they can provide demand side response. So basically heat pumps, either one big heat pump or aggregated heat pumps, can basically turn down or turn up and provide demand side response. So there's also things around operability of the grid as well. So heat pumps which can access grid services, they could provide these kind of frequency and voltage kind of services that the grid is looking for. Are there going to be new markets that enable this, but for heat pumps to access emerging things like local energy markets and district heating, where you have kind of larger scale heat pumps? We decided to investigate locational pricing. It was one that's fiercely debated, as I said, and it's also quite interesting in terms of the impact that it has on this kind of increasing variable prices. So the analysis that we carried out, we first of all looked at an individual heat pump. We looked at what would be difference in operating costs for that individual heat pump across the UK under locational pricing versus the current status of a unified price. And then we did similar for the system level heat pump rollout as well. So we looked at, if we aggregate all the heat pumps into the different zones, what whole system impact would locational pricing have on the whole system cost. So the first section was just individual heat pump analysis, and this kind of gives an overview of the methods and data that we used. So we used this model, H+C, which is an open source model for simulating historical years and future years and it can do either unified pricing or locational pricing. So part of this project, I kind of added the ability to do more of the locational pricing as part of the system. And basically we split the country up into different zones, and we can have different prices in these different zones depending on the demand, the generation, the network connection between the different zones. And this outputs wholesale prices for us. And then we have a number of different other models that we can use for things like calculating the COP of a heat pump or the heat demand of a single detached house. And then we use the Octopus Agile tariff kind of calculation to convert this wholesale price into a retail tariff that is kind of then we assume is kind of representative of what a heat pump operator, a domestic consumer basically, would actually pay for the electricity that is being consumed by the heat pump. And then, so with this retail tariff, heat demand and COP, we can look at the different zones and we can calculate an individual heat pump operating cost, both under unified pricing and locational pricing. And we chose to look at the years 2020 and 2035. 2035 because that's kind of like when we see that there might be a net zero power system, so it's quite an interesting year to choose. So a bit more on the H+C is like kind of open source data set and dispatch model for future GB power systems. So we have a preprint that's available so people can use the model. It's on GitHub. You can read about the model, see what data is out there. So do let me know if you're interested in this or have a look yourself. We've used it for other applications as well. It was originally developed to try and look at seasonal thermal energy storage, how to integrate that into the wider energy system. But it's also been used for things like security of supply in Scotland, carbon impacts of increased marine generation. But for this project, we used it to develop these time series of pricing, basically, of tariffs. So we developed a tariff for unified pricing. So this is basically where we have a one price across the whole of the UK, and we're not considering transmission constraints here. It's just how the wholesale market currently operates, and we can see that most of the time it's actually dictated by the marginal price of gas power generation, and we do have some periods where it drops down to zero, where there's excess renewables. So this is for 2020. Sorry, these two graphs. And then on the right-hand side, we have locational pricing. So this is the locational pricing for all the different zones. It's a bit messy, but we can see that there's there are far more periods where there's zero marginal costs in some of the zones. There's some of the zones that never goes down to zero marginal cost. It's a bit hard to see from this graph, but there's a higher degree of variability. That's basically what I'm trying to show with this second graph here. And then in 2035, we see even kind of a different pattern again. So for unified pricing, we see lots of periods where there's zero marginal cost, lots and lots of periods there. And then we have these kind of extreme high price signals. And it's kind of similar pattern as well for locational pricing here. So the future prices are highly uncertain. So there's lots of uncertainty around the inputs that we put in here for different technologies. And particularly we see one of the assumptions here is that we've put quite a high price for demand side response. That's why we see these quite severe peaks that come out of the pricing. But obviously there probably needs to be a bit more work in terms of doing some sensitivity around these inputs, particularly where we have very high prices. So for individual heat pump, then kind of operating costs that we end up finding. So as I said, we're basically finding operating costs for each of the zones across the UK. So this blue line here shows the unified price. So basically the operating cost if we have unified pricing. And we can see that there's a large number of zones which actually have a lower heat pump operating cost than the unified price. But these are kind of primarily in the north part of the network, and it's really kind of driven by the more of the renewables that are there and limitations that there are in the transmission network to transport that electricity. So we get more curtailment in the north part of the energy system than we do in the south part of the system. It's probably important to note we don't actually account for reduction in balancing costs. So this is one of the big kind of changes. If we had locational pricing, you probably also have centralized dispatch as opposed to self-dispatch. So you wouldn't have to pay generation to kind of turn down output from things like wind farms. So you wouldn't have those curtailment payments. So the reduction in that cost would be reflected in lower consumer costs, but we don't account for that at the moment. In 2035, we see more of the zones are actually above this blue line. So when we move to the future, we see that the heat pump operating cost is higher than the unified price for heat pump costs, and there's only a few zones now in the very far north of Scotland that actually have a lower operating cost than if we were under unified pricing. So now we're seeing that the zonal pricing overall has a kind of increasing cost for individual heat pump. And then the second part of our analysis looked at system level. So we looked at the whole rollout. So we used National Grid's future energy scenarios for projections in terms of where heat pumps might be and how many installations there would be for each of the zones. And then we can basically do the same exercise, but for the aggregated number of heat pumps in each of the zones. And here we start to see the kind of impact of having more heat demand in England and places where there are more people. So the left-hand side shows the 2020 annual heat pump operating cost. This is the total cost for all heat pumps in each of the zones. And the red shows for locational pricing. The blue shows for unified pricing. And so for 2020, there's very little difference between a lot of the zones in the kind of English part of the system, English and Wales, and then it's in the kind of zones around Scotland where we have those differences of the locational pricing driving lower costs. And then the graph on the right hand side shows for 2035, where we see the impact of having a lot more heat pumps in the kind of southern part of the energy system, and we have this bigger difference between the locational pricing again in red and then the unified pricing. So the unified pricing is lower in a lot of the cases for here. So overall for 2035, if we look at on a national level, if we aggregate all these zones together, the heat pump operating costs are around kind of 20% higher. So it goes from around $1 billion to 1.2 billion when we move from unified pricing to locational pricing. So this is just based on the household costs that are there. So and we have a paper under review which is kind of goes into more detail of all these results and the things that are going on here. And so to conclude, there's lots of kind of interesting things that we can see that will be impacts between REMA and heat pump economics. These results that we've kind of looked at in this kind of short project show that there's definitely going to be some impact from locational pricing on the heat pump operating costs, both for an individual level and a system level. And there's lots of kind of future directions that we can go with this. I think one part that we've not really explored is this idea that locational pricing can really reward flexibility. So we probably need to include that the heat pump can operate a bit more flexibly if we've got kind of the thermal inertia of a building or also kind of explicit heat storage as well. How might that influence the result? A key part that we've not really included the reduction in balancing costs that would be available from locational pricing, which I think would be quite interesting to include to see how that would pass on to consumers. This project's been really useful for us to develop our kind of main modelling ecosystem, and then into the future, I think the locational pricing could also be a key enabler for encouraging demand to locate with generation. So whilst this might not be the case for heat pumps, heat pumps will be widespread across the country. We don't have much flexibility in choosing where we're going to install heat pumps, but other technologies like electrolyzers or industry demands might have more flexibility in terms of where we locate them, and locational pricing could be a a motivator for doing that. Okay, so thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. Thank you to our two speakers. We'll have another webinar next month, and they'll all be advertised through our upcoming event on our Net Zero workshop. So please keep an eye out for those. We have recorded this, and we will be putting this on the Durham Energy Institute YouTube channel, and you'll be able to watch this back at your own time. And so I should say thanks to the speakers, two great talks. Thank you for everyone for attending.